My name is Andreas Weber. Maybe you mentioned that I don't have a company name behind my name because I worked for Schleich as a company during the last 7 years. I studied engineer in Germany 25 years ago and worked for mid-sized companies in Germany. And the last one was Schleich. Who of you knows Schleich? I guess a lot of people who have children know Schleich because Schleich is producer of toys, toy figurine. And maybe you know the famous Smurfs, for example, they come from Schleich, and a lot of horses and dinosaurs and so on. During my time at Schleich, I was responsible for operations, and that means we had to take care of a lot of data being produced in all the factories where the Schleich products are produced. That means Schleich is a German company, yes, and a small part of that product is production is still done in Germany, but the biggest part is done in China, Africa, Romania, and so on, different factories. Every single Schleich figurine is hand-painted, and there's quite a lot of legislation behind which you have to take care of. I worked in the mid-sized company I already mentioned, and was responsible for different things: logistics, product development, purchasing, and so on. And that helped me a lot to develop and implement that concept, which I would like to tell you more about in the following slides. This is a typical Schleich product with a famous Schleich label on it. I already mentioned hand-painted, and we normally, I hope you don't mind if I say we, because a part of my head and my heart is still with Schleich, but I stopped working for Schleich 3 weeks ago because for positive reasons, I will focus on that, what you see in the future. Schleich is, like a lot of other companies, faced to different issues coming up. Some years ago, everybody talked about product conformity, and of course, there were some companies around offering software for handling that issue here, and software means also a little piece of database, an MS SQL or SQL Server, and so on. Then the weird world of chemists came up and talked about chemical risk assessment. Again, new software products were on the market. Complicated and expensive software products, again, with a separate database and so on. And this is something we know today, but what will come tomorrow? You can imagine that a company has problems to handle all these, how does it work? All these data systems, because normally Schleich is a company with 300 people. They have to focus on their products, not on handling the data. And in the future, I'm pretty sure that trackability and traceability will come. Everybody needs transparency in terms of not only toy figurines, but also, that was the industry I worked before, cosmetic industry or food industry. We always have the same issues and the same questions. But do we really need to get another data silo? That's a big question, and we try to avoid that by creating a new system, and this is what I'm talking about. If you have a product and there's this daily business, you get some questions from customers. For example, is there any critical substance included in that toy? Then you have to really go to all that data. That means not only giving a direct answer. If it should be a reliable answer, you have to start with the product and go deeper and deeper. The first step is you have to take care of the process steps. How was it produced? Where was it produced? What materials did you use for produce that item, that bearded dragon, for example? And product, process, materials, this is normally the world you pretty well know by taking a closer look at your ERP system. If you have an SAP, everything here is included in SAP. But then this is not enough. Then you have to go deeper and take care of the substances inside. Substance means the chemical level, lead, arsen, and so on. If you talk about a dedicated lot of that product, and you want to give an answer to that lot, you also have to take care of the lots of the materials produced. This is also something not included in a normal ERP system, especially not if you talk about a supply chain going to China and beyond. The lots, of course, have to be lab tested, and result of that test is quite an amount of measured values. These values have a pendant in the world of legislation. There are limit values for that. And to close the loop, it's pretty important that you that you take care of the local context, yes. It's a big difference if somebody from Germany asks this question or somebody from Japan or US, because the legislation is totally different. That means, really, giving an answer sounds very simple here, means you have to take care of all these data chains. And the base for that is to build up a network of the data. The idea was developing a simple, cost-efficient, flexible, scalable, of course you know all of that, system for managing that products, especially produced in China, but that fits to all the other production sites as well. Very, very important, it should be cross-company. It should help us to collect the data along the entire value chain. You need a steady data model, no matter which ERP system you're using. Nobody knows, if you use today a Microsoft Navision, for example, nobody knows whether you use that in 2 years' time. Then you can use SAP. But your data needs to be stable for that. It must be simple to understand and simple to be used. Otherwise, the acceptance, especially in factories in China, for example, is not there. Scalable and extendable means we knew that we have to start small, think big, start small, and we have to grow on demand. That was a reason why not using a relational database-based data model. And at the end, we wanted to have all the data available, which we need to answer the questions coming from customers, as I already showed, but also from the officials. Schleich is audited every year, and the questions are pretty the same. The language which is used for giving the answers is another one, of course. What we learned was we need a concept beyond that well-known existing systems, and the existing systems like the SAP system were not enough. They are still necessary, of course, very important, but not for giving us the data which we need for that. Our challenge was to bring together different languages. The first is the language of the ERP system, products and processes, well known, but not only from one company, but from different companies. The next is the legislation. That's a world of PDF files, 150 pages PDF, the European Toy Safety Directive. It's hard to read, and the pity is that a lot of companies doing it by themselves again and again and again. There's a lot of work in that area. And of course, the world of the chemists, as I mentioned, the critical substances, you can put these two together and call it a world of legislation. And together, you need all these data together to give the answers. And we knew that we need one consistent data model in the middle. As we studied, we didn't know how to handle that, but we knew there's a demand for that. And we knew there's a lot of work to bring that data into that model. Because if you have a PDF file, you have to read that, analyze that, extract data manually, and put it into the data model, at least once. Why semantics? Semantics is the study of meaning, and how can you how can your data get more meaning? That's the main question. And the biggest insight was that there is an added value of data objects which is based on their relationships. We already heard that today, and we will hear it a lot of times again. But for a small company, small German toy company, that was a very important insight. So focus on these relationships, treat them as dedicated data objects, give them a name, and make them usable in your queries and in your business logic. It's all about nodes and edges. The concept is pretty simple, as we learned today in the morning. When developing a Schleich product, everything starts with a product idea in marketing. Marketing loves PowerPoint, our PowerPoint specialists. It's incredible how fast they are in creating 40 megabytes PowerPoints and distributing them in the company. No, in future, there is already one node existing, and that's called product idea. And if they have data to be stored, store them, attach them to that product idea. Then there's a stage gate process during product development. And the first thing being added is a so-called briefing board with some additional data about play value, prices, market segments, and so on. If this is getting an approval, then you come up with a concept board, a little more detailed, and so on. All these things were in the past lying around on the server of marketing in form of different PowerPoint. And you can imagine these are very important data inputs for the engineers, for example, who are responsible to fit that needs. That means also a budget, very important. That means we added to that product idea different nodes, step by step, manually, and the result is a really available and high quality of data for everybody in the company. When the product idea gets a go, then we start a project. Project means outcome of a project is, of course, a product. And you have a project profile with the constraints, money being available, and so on. You need to start with a model, such a horse, as you see it, is modeled by hand or by using very specialized software. A model, again, has a modeler, has some deadlines, and so on, some approvals for the shape, for the coloring, and so on. Everything is now connected to the nodes you already see here. That means step by step, we build up our net, our data net. After that, we talk about really creating a product version. By talking about product versions, there's, for example, one horse being produced in China, made in China, and the same horse is produced in Germany, made in Germany. Two different product versions, two different materials, details, and so on. Every product version is then spread up to, with a bill of material data to components, colors, details, and so on. Then you go, as I already mentioned, you go one step deeper and say this material consists or has included some substances. We call that a bill of substance. And if you jump on one of that substance, for example, lead, you will find in the system the limit value for the lead coming from the European Toy Directive, Toy Safety Directive DIN EN 71.3/3. So a component, to go into the technical corner again, a component, for example, needs a mold to be an injection mold to be produced, also being reachable within that network. The mold has some technical specifications and documents and so on. So you see, at the end, even the production process is part of that system. It's a very transparent system with a high level of data quality, and that's the base for all the other things which can follow. Advantage of using a semantic PDM was we could start small, very small. We started in the QC department because the chemists in the QC department came up with a new Excel sheet every 2 weeks, to be honest, and they always named the columns new. They used different words for one and the same fact and so on. It was crazy. And we tried to catch them and learn or fix one, let's say, Schleich-specific ontology, one language. And that was step number one. Took a lot of time and effort, but it was worth. And then, starting with that QC department, we learned that we can go to the technical department and to the product management department. Part of that data already in the system is the same, but we have additional nodes, additional objects to be modeled. But that was pretty easy to be done by using that structure and Neo4j equipment. Getting an answer, if you're sitting on one of that nodes and you have an answer, for example, you're sitting on a product management node, marketing, and you have a technical answer. Normally, they call an engineer, and he has to go through his Excel sheets and all the details, look it up, and so on. The answer is always a path, and this is pretty easy to find if you have a consistent data model in the middle. Data delivered by all stakeholders means, of course, when we started, we tried to use the data being already available in form of SAP, other databases, Oracle. What we needed to create are so-called connectors with a kind of mapping. But in addition, because the colleagues working in China and Bosnia, they already are working on the system, but they don't have any SAP. They use Excel or something like that. They are working interactively, and for doing this, we designed so-called micro apps, micro applications with a very dedicated functionality, specialized on one thing, which happens hundreds of times every day. It's a very small application, but the data for that application is directly put into the net. But it's not only bringing things in, we also used the SVHC list being available in the internet. SVHC stands for substances of very high concern. Watch out substances, it's an XML file, we imported that. That means you can use the data, bring it into your data model and have a lot of benefit from that. But of course, we also want to get something out. The bill of materials, bill of substances, the answers to questions, as I already mentioned, it's a big bonus. The common focus in the industry is really, if you take a look at the typical company, they have several applications with a known database. It's necessary because the application, yes, are focused on special functionalities. Something for product management, ERP system, document management, and so on. And most of the companies I talk to, they try to come up with an additional database or a graph database to handle the so-called metadata. And of course, there's some connection between the data silos and the metadata. But I think that's not all. Why not simply turn it upside down? If you start with really, during the production development process, if you start with creating that data net, as I already showed, you have a semantic product data management as your base level, as your base layer. At Schleich, some middleware was introduced, BizTalk from Microsoft in this way. And then, of course, still the packages, the functional focused software products are existing, but they have data interfaces by using that middleware. And the big plus is that, for example, the document management system was eliminated in terms of documents for product development, because we simply attached the PDF files, the Excel files, the Word files, and so on, if they were still necessary, to the nodes in the system. I'll show another slide later on. And our QC department wanted to introduce a so-called LIMS system, Laboratory Information Management System, typically a separate database, some functionality, and we were able really to cover all their needs by the micro apps we designed for that system. That means no additional system here. and what is planned to get rid of the access, it's a small access application in product development, and add all their data as well into the system. Why not simply using my ERP? That's a question I always hear, because I have everything in my ERP system. That's not right, because this is my ERP, my world. Okay, yes. But this node, for example, what is a raw material for me is a product for my supplier. And that goes on and on. What's a raw material for the supplier is a product for the sub-supplier. And if you want to get access to all that data, get rid of that my ERP, his ERP. You really need to talk about one big net, and it's not a question of who is internal, who is external in future. This is done by talking about views. This is a view for my company, and this is a view for the sub-supplier, for example. But the result is a consistent data net. This is pretty important. Why does Schleich follow this way? We think that it's simple and stable. That was very important, easy to understand. And we follow that sentence that we say data stays, but processes change. Process is part of the evolution, and evolution is necessary for every producing company, every company. But the data for your product, I can promise, it looks very similar in 10 years' time, but the processes and the software you use functional-wise will have changed within the next 10 years. But the product data stays. It's scalable. We started small, as I mentioned, and we grew on demand. It's cross-company. The colleagues from China work in parallel on their nodes, on their separate sovereign area of the network, in parallel to the engineers in Germany, for example. That's great. In the past, they always sent some CSV files, and my team tried to bring that data into our system and so on. It's always wrong. It's always too late and always wrong. It's much better to work with original data, not with a copy. Independent from software vendors and hardware, I mentioned it, it's beyond any SAP update. I don't care whether they have an SAP or Microsoft or what else. I say we have the data in the middle, and you can take any software package as you like. Collaborative and mobile, basic model for working in parallel, independent of time and place. Pretty important if you have a supply chain going around the world. Oh, sorry. And load share means special topics, for example, like the limit values of for chemical substances of the regulation could be done by anybody else and imported, for example. That's also a kind of business model. Some use cases at the end. I jump onto a screenshot. You see one of the figurines here. Schleich is producing in license Snoopy called Joe Cool. On the left-hand side, so you see some details about that product here. On the right-hand side, small accordion boxes, as we call it, where you can have Cypher queries in the background collecting data from the network, even far away. And if you see here, related, this is in German, sorry, I just see it, related legislation, you see that DIN EN 73, and if you click on that symbol here, for example, you get the explaining path. Why do I have any relationship to that DIN EN 71? Here's the product version I just sit on, and then you see, there are some painting colors here with a cyclohexanone. This is a critical substance. And for that cyclohexanone, there's a limit value coming from that legislation. That means I don't need a view at the total network of the data. I only need a part of that, and that path is giving me the answer. Why is that connected to that legislation? Everything in its place, very important, because I very often heard the question, I have some piece of data, where do I have to put it? I don't know. And if you don't give them any answer, they create an additional Excel. Again, storing it at on their own computer, that's a worst thing. That means talking with your people and giving everybody a place where he can put his data is very, very important. You start again with a product, and then a product always had, at Schleich, always has a catalog number, a price, franchise, forecast data, launch date. Then you have a one-to-end relationship to a product version. Again, product version is a concrete made-in-China product. Here you can find all the costs, a test scenario for QC, suppliers, packaging, label, molded parts. As I mentioned, every product also has connections to the product model. It's the first step in developing it. Product model is of course the base for product version and has more details like the modeler, the painting instructions, and so on. Now, if everything is stored, we started to talk about approvals. In the past, Schleich had, I think it was 5 or 6 different approval types. And when going deeper into that model, we detected that we have quite a lot more approval types because the product model needs to be approved in shape and in coloring. The launch date is entered by marketing, but it needs a approved sign. Don't touch it anymore, very important. The forecast data is approved. Costs was something coming from the finance department. They told me we need to have a kind of stamp on it that somebody takes care about margin, price, cost, and so on before we invest our money. Okay, why not working with a cost approval, with a financial approval? Molded part is approved, packaging, label. A label is so simple, but for toy industry, the label, one approval for the label doesn't exist because the label consists of a foil, of a glue on the backside, on the back, and the glue needs a chemical approval as well. It needs to be chemically approved because it gets into touch with the product, and the product is dangerous for the children, and so chemical approval. And also the base foil needs to be approved chemical-wise as well. And last but not least, simple label. We still talk about a label. That thing which we print on the label, the barcode, needs to be approved as well. That means a lot of different approvals. And I was also asked by my people, hey, it seems to be so complicated. Why do we have so many different work to be done here? And I asked them, did you do that in the past? And I got the answer, yes. And where? In my Excel. Then I told them, please kick away your Excel sheets. Do your documentation in the system. It's pretty simple. And from that moment on, everybody in the company sees, oh, that is chemically wise approved. It's really not additional work. It's only focused to the right direction. If you take a look how we handle that approvals here, there's a tab here called Approval. And here you can have an overview of the approvals. We can say the approvals being connected directly to that node I'm just sitting on, or you go deeper and collect all the approvals from chemical, from the materials and colors being used and so on, coming from the net. Taking a look at this here, that means green bubble means everything is right now with that approval okay, it's still valid. Taking that green bubble and putting it to the bill of material structure gives you at a glance an overview, oh, everything is nice, everything is fine with my product right now. On the right hand side you see part of that micro app which we created to handle, to enter and manage the bill of material data. Context-based document management, I already mentioned that document management, we got rid of that because if we created a node type called document, and Schleich has so-called questionnaires coming year by the suppliers, offered by supplier, And in that questionnaire, the supplier does a kind of commitment to the products he ships to Schleich. That could be pigments, for example. And this comes year by year. That means you have a connection to the campaign 2016, for example. And from now on, all the attributes, all the parameters, all the additional data being connected to those nodes are available to find your document. If you jump onto the supplier, it's only one click away to have that document. If you come from pigment B, for example, it's one click away to find your document. It's much better to have a separate document management system with a separate user interface where you have to take care of metadata, enter that data, and so on. Forget it. That was big plus. And of course, a lot of the engineers, for example, engineers love Excel sheets. They try to get a similar list, and they called it working list. And what you see here is you can filter down, please show me the status of all molds for products for January launch 2016. Schleich has some slots for launching new products. And you can set a filter, and at one glance you see all the products, all the molds. These are molds, injection molding items. All the molds are approved here. That's important because if you have a small plastic part being put into a set which was planned to be finished at September, for example, but our marketing had the great idea to put it on a set which comes on July, then you will see, oh, there's still a red bubble. We have to take care about that. Recommendations: invest into workshops, analyze your company language, and win your staff over. Invest time into the team. That's very important. They have to understand the concept to be on board. Use data interfaces at an early stage. Use the data which is already available. Start small and then only grow on demand. And grow step by step. Don't get lost in the shuffle of excited wishes, because if they understand the concept, a lot of wishes come up. That was my experience. Step by step, one after the other. But I think it's a great concept. It works for Schleich, and my future work will focus on that. And I hope that I will find some other companies following the same concept. Thank you very much.